For whatever reason, I wanted to see if there was a Linguistics for Dummies book. And yeah, there is. Hey everybody. Welcome to we are making sound. Clap again, take that. You can't stop me. If you're unaware of what Blank for Dummies is, it's basically this ever-growing series collection of like encyclopedia-sized books explaining basic and sometimes intermediate or complicated information about nearly every topic imaginable. The part that I found interesting, though, is that there's a web page for Linguistics for Dummies, and on the web page talking about the book Linguistics for Dummies, there's a list of some big questions that claim to be explained within said book. And yeah, so am I going to read said book? Maybe some other time, but not now. I want to look at the questions that were deemed worthy of showing up on that bullet point list for search engine optimization and examine them for their worthiness, you know? I'll kind of answer the questions, sure, but I want to more look at why these questions are so supposedly popular or so supposedly difficult or whatever, according to the authors of this particular Dummies book. What does it mean for this mostly English-speaking, mostly American audience to want these particular questions answered? That's what we're looking for. Why is learning a second language so difficult? So, I'm guessing the framing of the answer to this question is going to be about brain development, maybe? And how it's literally harder to reach fluency in additional languages beyond your native, or L1 as it's called, language after a certain age threshold. Like, little kids can absorb as many languages that they need to in their home environments, and it gradually gets more difficult for linguistic memories to stick as you get older, especially after puberty's done. I don't do developmental science or developmental linguistics, but it sure was a fun class for one semester. I mostly want to acknowledge why this question's here. Like, if you're from somewhere other than the US, Canada, Britain, Australia, or that mystery island off the coast of Australia, you're much more likely to have learned to speak 2 or more languages by the time you're 18 years old. Sure, in the US system at least, there are readily available foreign language programs at public schools. Programs, plural, if you're lucky. We had Spanish and that was it, so I speak Spanish now. But being bilingual isn't really like a necessity for like middle class Americans like it is in other countries, you know? Most of the world was conquered directly by Britain or indirectly by the US over the past few hundred years. So hypothetically, an American can get by around most cities in the world knowing only English. That is not the case for someone who grows up speaking like Tagalog or Wolof or German or something. So in this book marketed towards layman Americans who don't yet know how linguistics works, likely of the middle class or higher, the concept of speaking multiple languages fluently might seem like something crazy that only the big brain geniuses like Conlangers might be capable of. Why do French and English have so many words in common? Most regular viewers probably know the answer to this question like a script in their brain, but basically the Normans conquered England, they became the upper class, they speak something to akin to like Middle French, many of them learn English, but the most powerful people don't, like I mentioned earlier, because they didn't need to, and gradually French words started trickling down to the dirty English peasants like a Ronald Reagan wet dream, and soon enough, the fancy stuff is described with French words, and the rest sticks to its old English roots. Also, over time, English grammar simplifies and some grammatical constructions are absorbed too. Oh yeah, and ever since the internet has been a thing, English words have been getting stuffed into every language on earth, including French. So I guess we got them back, question mark. So why is this question here? I guess it's because this is one of the most basic quirks of modern English that people probably notice. I'll get into it more later, but a lot of people, not just in the Anglosphere, but around the world, don't really understand how or that language changes at all, or how. And some people straight up deny that language changes at all. This discussion of French words entering English and vice versa is a good way to begin explaining loan words and even the idea of creoles and pidgins. So I guess it makes sense. Why do dialects exist? Yeah, so later is now. Why do dialects exist? This is the same question as why there isn't just one language, which is actually two questions after this one, so we're going to talk about it more there. But this one specifies dialects, so I bet it's appealing to the supposed average person's perception of modern nation states with standardized official languages being a universal default that's existed throughout history. It's not the default, but a lot of people think that it is. So within that framing, if you look at a totally random country, say the United States, I think I read that correctly, you'll see that this territory is massive, where a whole bunch of people speak this language called English, and there is a general American English, which is frequently used to describe pronunciations in dictionaries, but there is no official language in the US, nor do any two individual real physical humans speak exactly the same way, even if those differences between two people are small and irregular, or idiosyncratic, as one might call it. Think of those big network web diagrams where all of the points are connected together, where the communication happens. And the more isolated certain communities are from others, or I should say, the more a community communicates within its in-group members rather than with people from the outside of that community, the more the speech patterns will evolve separately. New words will develop, sounds will change, slang will develop. After a certain point, it can even become a different language, which again, we'll get to later, but it's pretty much the same question. So why is this here? Again, I'll talk about it 2 questions from now in more detail, but basically it's because of the short-sighted nature of the human mind and the short duration of the human lifespan relative to linguistic shifts. Like the New Jersey dialect did the Southern accent have always existed, right? They've been stereotypes my whole life, so obviously it's always been this way, right? No! These changes are always happening. New dialects form and old ones die, and some become different languages. It just happens slowly. So at varying rates, depending on the situation, but slowly, no matter what, language changes, and thus makes dialects. And yeah, we'll talk about it later. Why can't all the sentences of a language be listed? What? I guess it's because there are new words and grammatical constructions being born all the time, and others are dying out all the time, so technically if a wizard collected every combination of every word and every position in a sentence, that list would have to change constantly? Or is this question maybe about the innate creativity of all languages, meaning that you could technically string along an enormous run-on sentence that looks absolutely atrocious and is likely ungrammatical, but can, with the power of the human brain, continue to grow and have unique meaning forever. Now, that sentence that I just said was 49 words long, and it can technically get infinitely and recursively worse than that. Yeah, I said it. I think this question is here because humans like lists. The idea that you can never list every sentence out is kind of frustrating if you think about it too hard, maybe. But It's merely the nature of a language having recursive and creative capabilities that you can technically never list every sentence. Why doesn't everyone speak the same language? Alright, here it is. The Tower of Babel, obviously. The end. Nah, but hypothetically there could have been a proto-world, like a language spoken by the entire current population of the Earth's common ancestors. It also might not have existed. There could have been like hundreds of different small tribes of early humans learning to speak on their own, leading to entire massive chains of evolution that mixed and intermingled and split off into all kinds of branches, leading to where we are today. That's the answer, by the way, evolution. When a community of humans interact with each other internally much more than with other communities in the outside world for generations, the words that they say are going to change with the situations they encounter, and so on. The internet has only been around for like 30 years, and in a big way it's already greatly altered our vocabularies and even some grammatical habits. Imagine tens of thousands or even 200,000 years of groups talking the way they want to talk as needed. The Romance languages were already forming before the Roman Empire even fell, and it took barely any time on a historical scale for them to come into their own as the modern Romance languages. The US has only been separate from Britain for like 230 years, and we have so many different speech patterns than the Brits and their like, change in language is natural with like the change in situations and the change in time. Why is this here? This one makes a lot of sense. You know, it's a significant linguistic change, like the splitting of one language into multiple, barely intelligible ones takes longer than a human lifetime. Like I said earlier, humans are short-sighted. They're also good at adapting to evolving speech patterns, to the point where many may not notice things changing until they're old and there aren't many members of their generation left, and all they get to see is how the young people talk, right? There's a cool channel called Life in the 1800s. I don't know if you've seen it, but you can like listen to audio clips and watch video clips of people who lived well over one full human lifetime ago, sometimes 2 full human lifetimes ago, and you can hear some pretty significant differences, though even then they're still understandable for the most part. Even Shakespeare's writing still kind of makes sense a little bit. Like, you get back to Chaucer though, and then you have a significant problem. So so if people live their entire lifetimes and that those lifetimes are too short to witness large developments of language, it's a pretty basic question to ask. How did so many languages happen? Time. Humanity. Why is it possible to translate one language to another? And I honestly never thought about this question in that way ever before this, but the answer's pretty interesting, I guess. Like, linguistics comes from the assumptions that the elements of human communication are mostly arbitrary, and thus the patterns of sounds, which most words are derived from, in spoken languages at least, are mostly disconnected from the physical world. There are words that are based on mimicking sounds from the real world. Those are the automatopoeias. The vast majority of the words in spoken languages have arbitrary structures that just came to being over time. For that reason, you'd think it would be difficult to translate one language into another with the same meaning coming through. And yeah, it would be pretty rough without cooperation between people. And even then, it's almost, a lot of the time it's not the exact same definition, you know? Translation differences. Like, imagine someone in, like, Ptolemaic Egypt writing the Rosetta Stone, per se. The ruling class spoke ancient Greek ever since Alexander the Great's conquest, and while everybody else spoke Demotic Egyptian. All they needed was at least one person who spoke both languages and could write in hieroglyphic, Demotic script, and ancient Greek. The translations are similar, but not exact, because the goal of any good translation is to get the intended meaning across as accurately as possible. A direct translation can be done between the two languages, but it would look clunky and ungrammatical and kind of dumb on both ends. because grammatical structures work differently in different languages, and it favors different kind of grammatical structures if you try translating things literally. Just look at the way some anime like subtitles come out. Like they bend over backwards to try and turn like Japanese sentences into English sentences of the proper caliber of like formality and stuff, and it barely ever comes out looking anything less than comedically uncanny. Then there's the question about the scripts. Like, decoding the sounds behind the scripts can be more difficult than just people learning the language itself. Like today you can just ask someone to read out the sounds of what each symbol means, whether in an alphabet or in a logography or whatever. But if we're talking about ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, it was a much more challenging effort. I don't have time to go over the whole process, but it took a whole lot of tracing back the ancestry of sounds used in the Demotic script and the hieratic scripts, and finding their likely origins in hieroglyphic symbols, etc. People thought it would be impossible for a long time, and the Rosetta Stone was like the first big breakthrough to finding how ancient Egyptian actually likely sounded, kind of. It was tough though. Like today there are still many ancient scripts that we're not even close to deciphering because we don't have any comparative sources. Oh god, that could be a whole video. Why is this one here? Sinking clap! That's right, there's a reason for the claps. Move on. So why is this here? The idea of being able to translate between different languages is a fascinating one. If you don't know anything about comparative linguistics or the intense effort that goes into deciphering ancient texts, reading something like hieroglyph, I can't say that frickin' word. Why is it so hard for me to say it? Hieroglyphics. Reading something like hieroglyphics or translating Chinese characters into a set of English meanings can seem impossible to overcome, but the answer basically lies in human cooperation. Friends we made along the way. Why do some conversations get off track? This list just got off track. Am I right? But I guess we're getting into pragmatics and psychology now. Oh boy, this is not my area of expertise at all. I'm not a scientist. I'm just the funny man who stands in front of the camera with the lapis body pillow. I don't do this stuff. I'm gonna talk about it a little bit, but seriously, talk about it in the comments on your own if you are an expert in this type of field, because this is not me. So I'm going to talk about this, and I might be kind of wrong. I'm taking this from the angle of the science behind conversation and attention spans, right? People have varying attention spans and can be reminded of things to bring up as examples originally meant to contribute to the original conversation. Next thing you know, that example is the subject of the conversation, and so on and so forth. People get distracted, and if the conversation has momentum between the participants, it's likely for things to get pretty far off track pretty soon. Conversation often ends up being a series of Family Guy cutaway gags, and in a never-ending fall into entropy until the participants remember what they were supposed to be doing or talking about. Getting to the point, it seems that the current science suggests that speech planning takes place in a different part of the brain than both listening and uttering speech. This disconnect, the literal physical disconnect, likely leads to the likelihood of one human coming up with a tangent while listening to another person talking. Again, not my area of expertise. I'm gonna move on. If you know about cognitive science, leave a comment about it, but I'm moving on. I'd like to be a little bit wrong and not all the way wrong. Anyway, this is here because the end result of communication, and thus conversation, is an important part of understanding how human brains work linguistically. Distraction and tangents and miscommunication and all that stuff are important aspects of human communication. Right? Making a conlang spoken by non-human creatures could make you question whether your particular subject species would have the same kind of communication errors and inconsistencies as humans would. Like how my readers from the Deexis video are pretty much incapable of miscommunicating because of the style and medium of their communication, just literally being like the molecular makeup of whatever they're talking about. Why is it harder to understand someone when you talk on the phone? So I assume this question is leading to a discussion about the importance of body language and even like lip reading and the efficiency of spoken communication. Like obviously like blind people get by, but for those who do not have inhibited senses in any neurological way, they rely on much more than just sound for communication. Not only does body language, like facial expressions and hand movements and posture and tone, play a crucial role in communication, but so do the literal shapes of our mouths while speaking. If you think about it, a lot of the sounds that we humans utter are pretty similar. Like look at the IPA chart. As a linguistics enthusiast, you probably can distinguish more sounds than the average person in your quiet room on headphones, but imagine trying to tell somebody every IPA sound over a low quality phone connection or like in a crowded loud room. Suddenly every fricative is just a fricative. Every approximant is an approximate, etc. Like, no matter how much of a pro-language gamer you are, this happens to everybody. In a crowded room, you do have one benefit. You can see the mouth shapes of your conversation partner. If your brain just heard fricative, but you saw the speaker put their teeth on their lower lip, your brain will pretty quickly be able to assume, fuck. It's not a universal solution. Thus why things like, bad lip reading can exist and work so well as a comedic element. Mouth shapes don't have a one-to-one correlation with phonemes or allophones, but it is something that can narrow down the possibilities to the point where there are only a couple valid options in context. This question's probably here to emphasize how narrow the sound palette of the human mouth really is, maybe, and to show the legitimate linguistic importance of the context given to our brains by external stimuli to the speech sound itself. By the way, when I say sound in linguistic terms, this can refer to the medium of any kind of language, including visuals for sign language. Which brings us to, why isn't sign language just a matter of making pictures with your hands? So how many pictures can you personally make with your hands? like I guess technically every minute shift of a finger counts, so that you could say it's technically infinite, but the amount that are discernible as specific pictures is not infinite. This question requires another sort of explanation as to how language happens. First of all, sign languages are usually hand movements, arm movements, facial expressions, and other literal actions done in tandem. So it's not just making pictures with your hands. And I feel like even the archetypical dummy would notice that after seeing sign language performed like once. Second, we need to talk about phonemes again. In my fewest sounds a language can have video, a bunch of commenters were like, 0, because sign language exists, duh, checkmate. And while, yes, they don't contain sounds, the subject of the video was on phonemes, not literal sounds. In linguistics, phoneme refers to any smallest unit of linguistic meaning, even if it doesn't involve an actual sound. Just like spoken languages speak with strings of arbitrary sounds, speakers of sign languages speak with combinations of semi-arbitrary hand shapes, movements, expressions, etc. I say semi in this case because most of the standardized sign languages are, or at least in the past, were conlangs, right? Invented in the past 200 years or less, and many of the words were created with analogies to physical reality in mind. But in a way that's harder to define than in spoken languages, I will admit. Sign languages do have phonologies, despite not having sounds. They do have, very hard to define, again, it's a subject of debate. They're still debating how to divide up sign language into phonemes and stuff. But the consensus is that they do have phonemes, allophones, etc. Right? I'm not going to go too in-depth into it here, but look it up. It's pretty interesting to read about. This question might be here to address the idea of language being made up of arbitrary or semi-arbitrary combinations of the ŋimps, which is really fundamental to understanding how language happens. Like, the spoken equivalent of this is like, why isn't spoken language just a matter of producing accurate audio recordings with your mouth? I'm moving on. Why are some speech sounds more difficult to produce and perceive than others? This is the last one, by the way. I guess we're ending it with a banger. When my friends try to say "nga," they almost universally end up saying "nya." To them, "nga" is a difficult sound to them. Except it's not. You know, I tell them to say song, and there's the velar nasal, just fine, right there. But then I tell them to put that sound at the beginning of the word, and it's gone. Like, sometimes they say it right the first time, but then I watch as they repeat it over and over again because they think it's funny, and every time they repeat it, it just gradually palatalizes until it's yeah, that they go around confidently saying yeah like a little cat boy thinking they're the coolest kid on the block. Certain sounds are literally more difficult for people to pronounce if said sounds are not present in their available language palettes, you know? And certain sounds that do exist in their personal inventories can only be articulated in certain positions in a syllable, making anything else sound wrong and bad. So if you only speak English, you only have this range of phonemes built into your head. If you speak Spanish and Arabic, this is your inventory. As language fans, we may have spent hours and hours mastering the phones, but our advantage is massive compared to someone who doesn't have the same hobby. Like, so why is this here then? I don't think the list of questions were in any particular order, but this really should have been like one of the first ones, honestly. I was just reading down the list. This question is fundamental to understanding why certain languages seem so difficult to pronounce from the perspective of speakers of other languages. Again, this book is for English L1 Americans who likely don't speak any other language. People who ask, how do people even make those sounds? If you ever talk to someone who's stubborn to the idea of linguistic arbitrarity, maybe point out to them how rare some of the sounds in English are. We have th and the, an approximate r, an L that can be alveolar sometimes and velarized other times. Two sounds which are pretty different but are considered under one L phoneme. Not to mention the many different allophones of T, right? If you're British, you say in the bottle of water. English is weird. English is pretty wacky. Like, some people may just think of it as the norm for sound inventories because it's their first language and they didn't think about it much more than that. And most casual linguistics fans get into language, decide English is cringe and boring, do more research, and learn more languages. Eventually loop back around to the realization that English is really weird compared to the other languages of the world. Like, so much so that it's actually kind of really cool. That's kind of my story. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Those are Linguistic for Dummies. I'm tripping on my linguistic little tongue today. Oh, I'm tripping on this little tongue. Oh, yeah. Linguistics for Dummies. Tough questions about linguistics. So, the only one that's really outside of my bachelor's degree worth of linguistics training was the one about why conversations get off track. Like, seriously, if you have more to add on that, let me know. And maybe I'll make an entire video on the subject when I have more time to research. It might be a little tasty. If you think I took one of the questions in a completely different direction than you think it was actually intended, definitely put in your interpretation. That's the fun of looking at these open-ended questions completely blind. I probably am gonna go read the actual book now to see their interpretations, and maybe I'll talk about it. Like, since I've just potentially made a fool of myself for every one of them. Alright, now that we're at the end of the video, I'd like to thank my very first channel member. Yep, I didn't really announce it, but it's a thing. There are channel members now, so my first channel member, Zoltan City, welcome. And also welcome to my newest patrons over on patreon.com/nga. Einer Anderer, I don't know how to pronounce that, hope you enjoyed it, and Monterey. One of the benefits of being a patron is sending me the memes to put on the green screen, by the way, if you were wondering where those came from. I don't know how I could get channel members to do the same thing. Get in contact with me, Zoltan City, and we'll figure it out. So anyway, the big announcement. The ConLang Census is ready for 2023. That's right. This will be our third year of collecting data about the demographics and interests of the ConLang community. We got a solid 1,927 responses last year, which is awesome. So let's see if we can beat that this year. Remember, you don't have to be an active creator of languages to fill out the form. You just have to be a fan of the creative linguistic arts. You can just leave the questions about language making habits blank if you don't have any personal language making experience. The first half of the survey is still totally valid for you because you are here. The algorithm brought you this far. You are a valid responder to said census. I'll put the link in the... Oh. Got a little zealous there. I'll put the link in the description, and please feel free to share it to any other ConLang related corners of the internet that you know. I want to create the most accurate response pool possible and create the most accurate picture of what a ConLanger in late 2023 does and is like. Friggin' click the link. It takes like 5 minutes. It's fun. Cool. Do it. Yeah. I'm gonna announce this again during the next Cursed ConLang Circus, which might be the next video released on this channel. Or there might be one more first. This circus is goddamn massive. What have you all done? What have I done to myself? It approaches. It's coming. It's coming. I hope you're ready to be cursed beyond recognition, because I've been gradually chipping through submissions for weeks with Eternal, and holy crap, my mind has ascended to another plane. That was a lot of talking. Alright. For now, nga is